Hi, welcome back. What we want to look at now is some of the material from Chapter 3 in your Hoffman textbook. In Chapter 2, we looked at word usage and sentence structure, and now we want to take some of the ideas that we've learned in Chapter 2 and incorporate them at a larger level into this next chapter, which looks a little bit more at the composition of writing and how to write paragraphs and still using all of those great ideas that we learned before. So one of the things we want to do is make sure that we have a well-constructed paragraph. And so a paragraph should tell a story. And so a story should be organized so it has proper flow. It should have a topic sentence so that the reader knows the purpose of the paragraph. And it should always be consistent. So what we mean by organizing your paragraphs is to make sure that that main topic is very clear to your reader. So one of the ways to do this is to use what we call power positions. And power positions are usually the first or the last sentence of your paragraph, and that's where we often will put in that main topic and the most important information that we want the reader to get. We don't want to bury it in the middle, so we want it to be on the sort of the outer sides, the beginning or the end of the paragraph. As far as using a topic sentence, what your topic sentence really should do is provide an overview of the paragraph. So typically, depending on the length of your paper, if it's a paragraph, usually we'll see the topic sentence at the beginning. Sometimes you may see the topic sentence at the end, especially if you're looking at an introductory chapter that's going to give you the format for the rest of the paper. So typically it's going to be in one of those two places. And this is going to introduce those key terms that you're interested in talking about in your paper. So you want to make sure that you bring up some of those key ideas in that topic sentence. And you want to arrange the details in the remaining sentences. So you're going to have a topic that's going to give an overview, provide some of those key terms, and then the sentences that come after that in your paragraph are typically going to provide details that go back and support the key terms and ideas that you were trying to express. So here's a sample paragraph, and what we can see here is this is our topic sentence. So the topic sentence, I know we're talking about VOCs, and specifically I know that we're going to be interested in where they come from. So they come from both man-made and natural sources. So these are some of the key terms that we're talking about in this particular paragraph. So now we see the next sentence uses that same keyword to go back to the topic sentence. So it's very clear that this is what should come next, is something about those man-made sources. And then next we have the next keyword, natural sources. And so we expect to see them in the same order they were in that topic sentence. So man-made first and then natural. So this is consistent. So the order, we have a topic sentence, we have the key terms there, and we know that that paragraph was in the proper order. So again, use a consistent order. We had a certain order in our topic sentence, and we repeated it in the paragraph. The other thing you want to use is a consistent point of view. So again, consistent order just says that we're going to keep them in the same order. So if I have this paragraph and in my topic sentence I'm talking about these different immunoglobulins, then the same order that I listed them here is the order that I should talk about them down here. Okay, so the reader expects that. You want to make sure that you do that. Also using the same point of view. So you don't want to switch your point of view within the paragraph. That's very confusing. So in this example that they use from the book, we see findings suggest that people returning from tropical countries, etc. And then down here, they change it from people to you, and that's inconsistent. So what we would want to do is to change that back to people instead of you may suffer. So the people that go are the people that suffer. Okay, so we want it to be consistent. We also want our sentences to be cohesive, and so there's a couple of ways that we can achieve cohesion. One is what they call jumping word location. The other is what they call consistent point of view. So here's an example of jumping word location, which helps us follow and are led through the paragraph. We end this sentence here with the genus Yersinia, and notice we start the next one with this Yersinia as well. And so we expect that. That's that jumping word. Here, we end this sentence with species, and then our next sentence refers back to, well, one of these species. So here we see several. Now we're going to concentrate on one of those species. Those species cause the plague, and then we talk a little bit about the plague. So that's that jumping word location that really pulls the reader through the information in the way that you want them to see it. Keeping a consistent point of view is important too. Okay, so you want to make sure that if you are sort of focusing your subject here on rhubarb, you stay with that. And so you don't switch back and forth from rhubarb to rhizomes perspective and that sort of thing. Okay, and it is okay to occasionally throw in the pronoun instead of the formal noun if you're going to be using it a lot. You can see in this instance, if we had used rhubarb every time, it might get to feel overused. And so, but what we're also seeing is, here's another thing that it's showing. When we go back to rhubarb, we're seeing that when we use rhubarb, we refer to it as it. And then, of course, over here, this is plural, so now we are using they in this particular case. And we might want to keep that consistent. Either if you're going to talk about a species as a single unit, you can refer to it as it. If you want to talk about the species as a group of individuals, you might talk about they. But whichever way you refer to that you want to stay within that particular one. So it would have been better in our previous sentence to stick with either the plural or the singular form, if possible. Another thing that we can do to create cohesion is to create continuity. And so continuity is really the idea of again, leading your reader through the material. So each idea is really connected to the next idea, and so it makes sense. And a couple of ways that we can do this is we can repeat key terms, which pulls them along. We can also use transitions. So using key terms to create continuity, a lot of times those key terms are the important ideas in the paper. So you're going to obviously use the right terms for that. So in this particular case, our key terms might be kinase or HIV1. Non-technical terms that you often will see are things like mechanism or decrease. But again, if you're going to refer to, let's say, a particular term, when you repeat it later, use the same term. Rather than, in one case say mechanism, and the other case the procedure, or whatever you might use in place of mechanism. You do occasionally want to vary things because the wording can become very redundant if you don't. But you don't want to change words where that's the standard that is agreed upon in science. So, DNA replication is DNA replication. And so to try to put some other term from a thesaurus in there just would not make sense, and your reader would not understand it because they know what replication means. So some things you can go and you can use a thesaurus, and you can try to change the word a little bit to make it a little more interesting, but you don't want to do it to the point of making it confusing, particularly with the key terms in your paper. So again, don't change those key terms. If you're going to talk about C. elegans, talk about C. elegans. Don't call them worms in one place and C. elegans in another. And worms, of course, is very vague, and so that is really would be much better if we rewrote that to C. elegans. The other thing we want to do is try to link key terms together. Okay, so one of the things you can do, if necessary, is you can use a category term to help define the specific term. An example here would be, in this particular case, we've got infectious disease being caused by gram-positive organisms, so that's a large category that they belong to. But then we're going to talk more specifically about Staphylococcus aureus. So we've kind of linked together Staphylococcus with gram-positive organisms, making it clear here that this is one type of gram-positive organism. One way to do this a little bit better, if I wasn't familiar with some of this, I may not realize that that's what the author's trying to say, that this is a type of gram-positive. So if I wanted to really clarify that, I could say one such organism, Staphylococcus aureus, and now the reader definitely knows that this Staphylococcus is a type of gram-positive bacteria. We want to use transitions too, and there's a lot of ways to use transitions. We can use words, phrases, we could actually use a whole sentence, particularly if we're transitioning from, let's say, an introduction to a methods or a methods to a results section. So in between sections, we might have a whole sentence that is transition. And so what we want to do typically is to put that transition where it belongs, which is between the two concepts. So typically a transition is going to be sort of at the end of one sentence to link it to the beginning of the other, but most commonly we see it at the beginning of a sentence to link it to the previous information. Some of the words that we often will use for transitions you can see here, and they typically will go with certain ideas. So if I want to let you know that I'm drawing a conclusion, I will often say therefore or thus. If I want to add to something, I might say furthermore. If I want to show you there's a difference, I might use however. So you can use these transition words in between concepts, and it helps tie them together. So here's an example of, I want to tell the reader that we observed these effects of phase distribution, but we also measured aqueous carbonate concentrations. So furthermore means, okay, now in addition we've done a little bit more here. There's also some transitional phrases that you can use in addition to, besides a, in contrast to, as a result of. Normally you try to use fewer words whenever you can. So some of these transitional phrases you want to be careful with not overusing them because it makes the paper more wordy than it needs to be. But you do want to have some transition in there. So it's a balance between supplying that transition and keeping down the wording on your document. So in this case, we're using a phrase. They determine the sensitivity of squirrels to external stimulation, and then for this purpose, they measured, and they're telling us what they measured. So it's clarifying. We studied this, and this is how we did it. And so it links those two ideas together. Transitional sentences, they don't really give us whole sentences here, so I don't really know why they're not just calling these transitional phrases. But again, in a paper where you're going from a discussion or an intro to a discussion, intro to a conclusion, something like that, you may have a full sentence that really is a transition. So in this particular case, these are really phrases and not sentences, but you can see that I might finish this and the whole thing ends up being a transition between two sections. Okay. So here again is our transition that we're seeing here, that phrase. Condensing. This is one of the biggest things that you need to work on and that we all need to work on when writing science. We need to be as concise as possible. Use the fewest words that you can that will still get the message across, will still be good, solid grammatical composition where you're actually helping the reader to walk through your paper, but not putting extra words in there to do it. So you want to make sure that the reader knows what is important. Sometimes you read a paper and it feels like there's just rambling and you're really not sure what the main point of the paper is. You definitely don't want that to happen. So it needs to be very clear what is the main purpose here. And then of course what you're going to do is you're going to de-emphasize or omit less important information. And so you can use that, again, you can use emphasis words, and you could replace phrases that or alter phrases that suggest that one idea is more important than another. And so if I said although, and I have a phrase there, so although pH affects enzymes, temperature has a much more dramatic effect. So in that particular case, I'm getting ready to talk about temperature, and temperature to me is more important than pH at this point, what we're getting ready to say. So you want to make sure that you emphasize the right things in your sentences and paragraphs. And again, what you can do is take and replace certain phrases or omit some phrases. So emphasizing the important information, what you want to do is establish what is most important. And we already mentioned you can put that in a power position at the beginning or end of a paragraph or sentence, and that will establish that importance. And you might even say in your paper the most important finding. So you're very clearly telling the reader this is what we found and what we think to be the most important thing. De-emphasizing, again, you can subordinate it. So as I mentioned before, you can use a term like although, and although basically subordinates this first part and lets the reader know that the really important part in this sentence that you're going to talk about is the second part. So this part is dominating the sentence, the first part is subordinating, and that's what we would want to do if we want to emphasize the second part of the sentence. So another thing again is we can omit lots of words and phrases. So a lot of times in this particular case, rather than putting Jones et al. In there and then also citing them in the back, we could just make the statement and then we cite them at the end. Or you could replace it either way, but you don't need it in there both times. So we want to shoot for brevity as often as possible. Omitting some phrases and sentences. So, for instance, a lot of times we'll see, you know, the next section will discuss the results, or these results are discussed next. Just leave that out. It's obvious that it's coming, and we really don't need to see that. A lot of times it or in, these phrases that sort of like start and then end in that, are often very easily just left out. Okay, so in the light of the fact that, and whatever you're going to say, just get rid of all of that and just say what you need to say. So due to the fact that, as a result of, in the light of the, leave all of those out. You can go back and you can read whatever comes after this in the sentence, and it will be no different with or without that phrase. So we leave the phrase out. The other thing we want to do is to try as often as possible to make our statements from the positive rather than the negative. So for example, rather than say there were not many, why don't you just tell me there were few? So whenever you see yourself using not and negating something, ask yourself, can I change that to a positive and get rid of that word not there? And anytime I could take two words and make them into one and it still reads well, that's exactly what I want to do. So the other thing that is real common is putting in too much detail. Okay, if the detail that you are including in no way will really affect the outcome of the experiment, let's say you're doing methods, then you need to leave it out. Now you may want to check with your lab instructor on specific courses, but in a typical scientific paper you would not see this full sentence up here. Using a 1 mil tip, 750 microliters of aliquot were removed into a new Eppendorf tube. They're just going to tell you that they aliquoted 750 microliters. Okay, what tip you used and what type of tube you put it in really isn't going to matter. I could do this experiment as long as I know how much aliquot to remove. So I can figure out how to do it and where to put it. So unless that matters, unless you really think that that's going to influence the outcome of the experiment, you leave it out. And intensifiers, any superlatives that you have in there, greatly, very, those kinds of things, you want to leave out. So very large, no, just leave out very, just call it large. So you want to make sure that you look for those kinds of terms and use them very sparingly. If you have any questions on the Chapter 2 homework, assignments, any of the feedback that you are going to receive, please make sure you contact me. Have a great holiday weekend. Bye.